Hawks21 here, back with another Splinterlands video. So we just got Grandmaster Rathe just last week. I ended up with 4 copies. I was guaranteed 3, so I got 1 extra. I actually sold all of them somewhere between $22 and $23. I just followed the pattern of what typically happens. When cards get released, people get really excited about them. Excitement dies down a little bit. More people are either claiming their rewards or now getting him in packs. And they want to sell sort of at these higher prices, and that brings the price down. I'm definitely going to buy back in, sort of just waiting to see how low this could potentially go. But today is not about Grandmaster Rathe directly. I'm already thinking about what could be next in terms of legendary summoners, and I think Grandmaster Rathe's ability gives us a little bit of a hint. But before we get into all of that, I am Hawks21. I make Splinterlands content almost on the daily, probably every other day. I just took a little bit of a break because of vacation, but if you like Splinterlands content, this is the channel for you. And if you do enjoy my videos, or if you learn anything new from them, it would be awesome if you could like and subscribe. Alright, let's get into it. So, we're going to go back a little bit here in Splinterlands history. I am on Peak Monsters. If we go back to, I believe, Beta. Yeah. So this was sort of the first, this is the beta version. I don't think Alpha had full, yeah. Alpha, they didn't do a full legendary summoner release. There was just the Selenia for Dragon. But Beta was their first legendary summoner full release for every single Splinter. And I want you to notice something. A lot of them counter each other, right? So Play-Doh and Cryptmancer are almost exact opposites of each other, actually. If you were to play these against each other, the +1 melee counters the -1, +1 speed counters the -1, and then basically both teams would just lose a health across the board. So they released these two, almost exact opposites. You then see Prince Ren, the +1 archery, right? So this is clearly an archery focused summoner, and I'm sure you've gone up against Prince Ren. I struggle to beat him because there's so many great low mana archers on Earth. But a little bit of a counter here. The +3 shield, that's a lot for the archery to get through from Prince Ren, plus cancels out the archery boost, right? So it makes the archery less crazy and then gives it way more shield to have to go through. Also sort of countered Selenia a little bit too, but more of a direct counter I would say to Prince Ren. Now you can sort of see via the price what happened. Prince Ren is fantastic, and unless you are specifically playing Peak Rider, if you surprise someone with a Prince Ren, you're going to have a big advantage. So yeah, that's why the price is higher. And then Cryptmancer just proved to be a little more useful than Play-Doh. So, I haven't really used these cards too much. I've started using the Cryptmancer a little bit, renting him, but I've actually never used Play-Doh Emberstone. So there are some direct counters here. Now we're going to take a look. Oh no, not promo. We're going to go to Untamed. Actually, before we do that, the one who didn't really have a counter was Valdemar. And now, part of the reason why, part of that is I think it's because it ends up, it's the most expensive summoner, and part of that in this pack, and part of that to me is because there is no direct counter at that point in the game, and still you sort of see how dominant Valdemar has been. There's a lot of great water magic cards, specifically the older ones, and at the time, nothing here countered magic, so that sort of allowed Valdemar to run free. But now if you go to Untamed, which was the next major release, you're going to see something similar, a couple less direct counters. I would say the beta ones had full direct counters. But the most obvious one, you see Jotun, which is the +1 archery with the blast, right? So I think the intent of Jotun was similar to Prince Ren, right? Encourage a bunch of archery, which is what you typically see, but with the addition of blast. Then Lil Deep Swimmer, it's hard to argue that, you know, this wasn't designed as a direct counter to Jotun, right? You give everyone return fire, give everyone shield, so make it the archery harder to go through the shield, and then the blast damage gets all sent back at Jotun. Unfortunately, I think it was underestimated how powerful blast would be, plus how useful the blast would be in the terms of, like, you know, fire has some decent magic cards, has some really great melee cards, so it's not just people spamming archery, where I think with Prince or ranged, I think with Prince Ren, you see a lot more direct sort of, you basically know archery's coming. But with Jotun, you know, people set up, you know, combinations of magic archery, so you're not just getting this sort of spam return fire. But you can see it was the thought, right? This was supposed to counter this. Now these are a little less direct, and I think, you know, we'll get into Kitty for a second. But let's look at Mimosa first, right? So you have Chancius, who has triage, right? And can triage anyone, any monster in the backline, as you can do with triage. That's very, very powerful, right? Because if you're doing backline damage, or if it's poison, every single turn, your summoner is going to heal someone in the backline. Mimosa's affliction sort of takes care of that, right? Everyone's afflicted. There's no, unless someone has immunity on the backline, in which case they wouldn't be getting poisoned anyways. I guess if they were taking like sneak damage or something, then it would be useful to triage them. But unless they have immunity, there's no cleanse for the backline, right? So this affliction takes his Chancius's triage completely out of the game. On the flip side, with Kitty, you could sort of see the thought process, right? With the heal, let's take out the heal. The only problem is there's cleanses, and it's very few times I'm not working a cleanse into my lineup if I see a Mimosa and I'm running Kitty. You know, in general, there's a lot of cleanse cards that are really, really useful, so I think it's really easy to cleanse. And then also just the speed is insane, right? Like, again, I see the thought process, but, you know, you could argue the execution wasn't perfect here. Here, I think the matches up great. Here is pretty good. Like, if you run a Little Deep Swimmer against the Jotun team, you're more successful than a lot of other summoners you run against Jotun. But I think the blast was more powerful than expected. Also, the Mimosa, I think, was key to counter Valnamore, right? There was no real magic counter, so you come out, and the first thing you do is toss in something that gives everyone void. So Mimosa was used as a counter for, I think, a lot of things. I'll make a separate video about what they could potentially do to counter Kitty without making more OP cards, but that'll be a conversation for a different day. So, the point I'm trying to make is a lot of times they build in defensive counters to the offensive summoners that you see in the releases, which makes sense. So, if we come back to Grandmaster Rathe, he's going to be useful as a defense against most things, right? Like, we've talked about return fire with archery and the extra shield. Obviously, the shield with the void armor, it's designed to be a magic defense. So that makes me think we might be getting a legendary magic buff. I'm not going to pretend to know what exactly abilities or, you know, whatever it could have, but having this strong of a magic defense card makes me think a magic buff is potentially coming. And then that gets us to the question of what Splinter. Water, they've slowly moved away from the magic water sort of meta over time. You had Valnamor and you had Elric, and it was really dominated by magic attacks. But now with Kelia, you've sort of seen some melee plays that are being used a lot. Earth just got a magic sort of buff. That doesn't mean they won't continue to get it. A lot of times they will double down on certain buffs. And I actually wouldn't even be really opposed to it, per se. But for the point of this video, to be honest, it's not that fun to talk about because, you know, we know what it looks like. We know what magic buffs look like with Earth right now. And, you know, unless they do 2 magic or some other game-changing ability, we have a pretty good idea of what a magic buff summoner would look like with Earth. We know it's not life, obviously, and I don't think it's going to be dragon. It might, but I just don't think it is. I think there's 2 options. Fire and actually death. So people have been calling for a fire magic summoner for a long time now. Let's quickly go to modern. And let's just run through the cards and see what it would look like. Who would become more useful? You know, Venari would become useful just from the void armor. You know, nothing crazy. Game's freezing up on me a little bit. There we go. You know, the Jin Apprentice is one of the cheaper rare cards. The reason being, you know, 4 magic at the highest levels for 5. Not bad, but you know, there's no real abilities and the health isn't high, right? Normally for a card like this, you'd see it either be really fast or it'd have really high health, or the damage would be like insane. One where like it matches the mana. You don't really have any of that here. You don't have any abilities. The health isn't that high. The speed isn't that great. The attack is pretty good, but it's nothing crazy. Then eventually it gets Death Blow, which is an underwhelming ability. So this card doesn't bring a lot to the table. But if you're boosting the magic, obviously becomes more useful. At the highest levels, 5 for 5 is great. At the lower levels, right, at silver, right? Yeah, silver, you're getting a 4 magic attack card. Pretty good. Lowest levels, 3. This card would obviously become more valuable. This is the one that would be really fun. I have it fully maxed out. 13 mana games. I love playing Kitty plus Efreid Elder. Getting the last stand, it gets really, really fast. And it has the phase, so it dodges magic. You know, boosting this magic would get him up to 6 when he gets last stand. So this would become a really, really interesting card. Jin Inferni, same thing. You know, these abilities are a little better, which is why I think it's a more useful card than a Jin Apprentice. But I guess that makes sense, right? He's the apprentice to this guy, probably. You know, all of a sudden he gets to 6, and then Giant Killer. All of a sudden we're doing 12 damage to the big boys. That would be pretty substantial. You know, you could wipe out some of the biggest tanks in the game with just 1 hit. Test the Wide with the Void would become more useful. This would be an interesting one. Like right now, this card gets no love. And, you know, with the 9, with this becoming 4, which means 12 damage every other turn, would that be enough to get people really using this card? I don't know. I would have to like test it out, but right now, when I've used it and tested it, the 9 every other turn just doesn't justify the 8 mana cost. With 12, maybe. I'm not sure. Goblin Fire Mage, I haven't really paid attention to this card, but you know, 4 for 4 would be really good. The Blind. Oh, at the lowest levels, I think you can only play level 1 Epic Ciperons. I actually can't remember. But at lower levels, this gets really interesting. That would be a fun card. Grum, I think, would get a big boost. The Void and the Void armor. You would need much more magic defense and fire. And then I also haven't really paid attention to this card, but you know, boosting its magic, it has the Void. This would become a much more useful card. A lot of people have been calling for fire magic, but one, to me the cards aren't that strong. There's not that much use to magic here. And two, and maybe how much does this matter? I don't know. I think there's a better fit from a lore perspective or a storyline perspective than in death, which is funny because typically the death summoners, if we just quickly go to look at the death summoners, they've all been nerfs to your opponent, right? -1, -, then defensive here, minus. Poison, which is offensive, right? But it's through draining your opponent. And then Grandmaster, obviously, minuses across the board. So, the pattern has been to nerf your opponent. That's what death does, nerfs your opponent. But I think there is a storyline here. If we go, clicked off too early. If we go back to these summoners, right? These are the modern ones. What do a lot of them have in common? Magic defense via 1 magic. Magic defense via reflection shield. Magic defense via void. You could make the case, this new up-and-coming Chaos Legion summoner has been studying these summoners, right? Has been hanging around these summoners. And these summoners have realized how powerful magic is, right? And so their purpose is to defend the Death Splinter against magic. This summoner turns around, says, well, if magic's so powerful and we need to stop it, or we're trying to stop it, or we're trying to defend against it, why don't I master the offensive side of magic? Would be able to learn from them, because these guys clearly have an understanding of magic, right? Whether he sort of uses their resources with them knowing or without them knowing, that remains to be seen. But I think you could fit into the storyline a pro-magic death summoner. And it would have counters within its own system when you talk about outside of lore game balancing. So let's just quickly look at those cards. Again, this is all speculation. I'm just having fun with this. I don't know anything. It was just a fun exercise to run through, like, okay, what could we see next? And I saw some of these patterns with how they released the summoners, and I thought I'm expecting a magic summoner, but I know nothing. I'm just having fun with this. There's some key cards that would get major boosts because of their abilities. First one, Bonesmith. 2 magic with the leech life. It can only bring in 1 every single time. Boost the magic to 3. It is now life leeching 2 every single time. That is a huge, huge, huge buff. Makes this card way more usable. Let's see. Where's the other guy? I'll get back to the revealer in a second. Life Zapper is the same exact thing. Life leech, get to 3, 2 health every single time. Way, way, way more valuable. And you can get that too in silver. So you'd be getting a 3 damage life leeching 2 in silver. Revealer gets more useful. The 2 magic is a little underwhelming. The reflection shield is great, right? Like in poison matches, you're using them all the time. But this card becomes usable in other types of matches as well. The immunity is why. The poison and blast really is what you're using it for. But all of a sudden it gets 3 attack. It's more useful to actually throw in there when, maybe you're not fully expecting blast, but the reflection shield can still help. It doesn't take damage. That's the other thing. It won't take damage at the highest levels from return fire. So the 3 magic can't be sent back at you. So that would be a pretty big boost. The Nightmare would get a boost just because of the really fast phase to dodge magic. Insidious Warlock would become really interesting to me. And I know I just talked about the Ifrit Rising not being potentially interesting. For 5 mana with the blind, right? So it's bringing a support structure where you're not spending 8 mana in the main point is the attack. There's also another point to it with the blind. For 5 mana, we're talking about doing 12, which is the same as Efreet Rising with the 8 mana. Right, so this card gets really interesting. If you can put something in for 5 mana that's doing 12 damage every other turn, plus blinding, very interested in Insidious Warlock if it was to get a magic boost. Here's to, where'd they go? Oh, you almost can't see them, but Magic Necrosis. Right, getting it up to 4, even at these lower levels, right? Getting it up to 4 really early on with the snipe makes this incredibly powerful. And then look at this little snipe magic play here with the Death Elemental. You can get the Death Elemental up to 3 for 3 mana. So the combination of these two would be really fun and interesting. And you have the Bone Golem, which right now is sort of just a reverse speed master. It's an incredible reverse speed card, but that's really the only rule set it gets a lot of love. I think the Void would make it more useful. Darkest Mage would be crazy. 3 magic for the 2 health with for the 2 mana with decent health, Rust and Affliction, so good abilities. This card would be crazy if it got a 3rd magic. It already is crazy. I love that card. The Jin Murat, just boosting its magic, also has some magic defense with the Void Armor. Ancient Lich getting a boost up to 4. Not that crazy because you're still getting the Life Leech, but it also has Void. Throws a Nightshade would be, I didn't even see this one on my first pass through. The 1 mana, I actually have this leveled up too. The 1 mana 2 magic attack with the Triage, this card would be awesome. Then probably the best magic defense card in the game, with the Void and the magic defense at the highest levels. It's really hard to get through. It's a melee attacker, but I use him a lot as a backline tank when I rent him. I don't own him. You know, he would become, if you're boosting magic all of a sudden, he would become very, very useful as a defense. And then finally, Cthulhu with the Last Stand would just make it a little bit more powerful. Nothing crazy. But yeah, so this was all speculation, but you know, a lot of people have been calling for a magic boost to fire. I think it would be more fun to get a magic boost to death. I think it could fit in with the lore nicely. And I think we're probably going to get that magic boost based on history and based on how strong of a magic defense card Grandmaster Rathe is. But again, just speculation. I don't know anything. I'm having fun with it. It's a really exciting time to be playing Splinterlands. And despite that, asset prices are pretty low. So not a bad time to check out the game if you've sort of been on the fence. I really appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed the video, it would be awesome if you could like and subscribe. Getting closer to 1,000, and I'll have my video explaining the giveaway that I'll be doing coming out soon. So stay tuned for that. I will see you guys around the game. Have a good one.